Hey guys, it's Donald the Solo RPG guy here. We're going to do, well, basically a getting started to play solo. Um, Artichoke Dip, Geek Gamers, Wargamer Fritz, a lot of the other solo RPG YouTubers out there usually suggest that you, well, start small. The best thing I can tell you in order to start is literally do a dungeon crawl. That'd be the best place to start. Make your characters, put them at the front door of the dungeon, and go. Now, I'm going to take the extra step and do a little bit of prep work. Now, as you can see in front of us, we have the Forbidden Lands map. This is the game world in which my adventures will take place. So if I'm going to do a dungeon crawl, the first thing I'll need to do is find me a spot for the dungeon, and then at the same time find me a spot that will act as my home base, my village, my town, whatever, to start, so I can go back and heal when necessary and buy equipment and all the other good stuff. So I'm sitting here, I pull out my map, and I look at it, and down here at the bottom of the map, I don't know if it'll come in that clear, but there is a dungeon location, and there's a spot here for a village, and they're relatively close to each other. This here can, by the Forbidden Lands rule set, could easily be traversed in about a day's travel. So, I've got my dungeon location, and I've got my village location. I've already started. Boom. We're good. Now, the next thing I did was I went to my Forbidden Lands Game Master's Guide, and I went to the Creating of Adventure site village, and went here and rolled on these tables to get me a village. This will be my home base where I go home to rest, and the starting point for basically the adventure. And then when I rolled up these notes, I don't know if you can see them very well, the village is an approximate size of 85 inhabitants. It's recently built. It's literally only 2 years old. It's ruled by a wise druid. It has a current issue of undead bothering it. And there's also a case of strange disappearances. And the village is so new that everyone is literally living in tents. And then when I rolled up the institutions that are available, I got a temple of Flow, which is one of the gods in that world, a smith, and a tavern, which the name came up to be the Little Lamb. And I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense. We got a wise druid, a temple here that in the game world Flow tends to be kind of a naturalist type god. Water and healing and nature tends to be her type of domains. So I'm like, okay. And then as for the Little Lamb, I'm like, I went through the list of the tavern names, and I'm like, okay, that sounds like the name of a tavern that would be in a village ruled by a wise druid. So hence I named it Nature's Hollow. So now I have a small beginning backdrop for my dungeon crawl. Even though this isn't the dungeon itself, this gives me a home base, an anchor to work with. Now the next step, of course, was I had to make characters that I'm going to take. At first I sat there and decided, okay, how many PCs do I want to take with me? I was running a campaign with 4 PCs, and I still have that campaign on pause. But running 4 PCs can be quite difficult. So I went ahead and I cut it down to 2. Oh, excuse me. The first one I made was a Dwarven Warrior. I decided I'm going to start him off at first level I mean, typically in the Shadow of the Demon Lord, you start them off at 0, but I wanted to give them a little bit of survivability. So I made this dwarf. His profession background is he's a weaponsmith, a soldier, and a tracker, which the weaponsmith now ties him to the village. He, in some way, can be tied to that smith, whether that's where he learned the trade. Maybe since the village is relatively new, he's the one that helped set up the shop in the town, going from that point of view. And then, so he'll survive, I created a priest that happens to be a priest of the god Flow. So now I've got my characters ready. I started going to the dungeon. I literally started at the front door. I didn't worry about the travel time from the village to the dungeon. I decided the story is going to start that these two have come from that village that's being plagued with undead and random disappearances. So I went back to the book and began creating a random dungeon. I got little notes up here that says it's a small dungeon of only 5 rooms, a stronghold that was built by the dwarves, but the resources dwindled and therefore it was abandoned. And then, utilizing my charts and whatnot, the first room was empty. The second room also happened to be empty. It was an abandoned planning room. This is probably where the dwarves planned, everything from military activity, mining activity, whatever the case may be. And then the very next room happened to be a training room, which you can see right here, training room. I have an encounter in there with 6 animated corpses. Now, so far, I haven't had to do, any miniature movement or anything. I rolled up the background of the city, or in this case, the village, and then I started rolling on my random dungeon generation table, and boom, now I get to have my first combat with these 2 guys. Now, as you can see, this folder is where I'm keeping track of everything. A while ago, it was empty. But as you can see now, I have the small anchor of a campaign that can start. Because now, once we clear out this dungeon, we go back to the village, we can let them know the dungeon has been cleared or not, depending on our success. And then take the campaign wherever it may go from that point. Now, I can't promise you guys it, but I'm going to see if I can set this table up in a way where I can show you, combat and whatnot in this room between the dwarf, the priest, and those 6 animated corpses. But as you can see, there's your starting point. I mean, start a dungeon crawl. If you need to create yourself a little town or whatever to begin telling the story. I mean, we've already got the synopsis of the story. We have a young town or hamlet that's just been built. It's being plagued by undead and strange disappearances. And now we're going to go into that dungeon and see if we can solve the riddle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 potential rooms, even though the dungeon's only supposed to have 5 rooms. So I'll probably have to erase one of these doors. And my PCs will then finish off this dungeon. But you need a starting point. That's a simple, easy way to start. Roll up your characters, get your dungeon generation material out, and go. And then just let the game kind of, develop on itself. It will develop a life of its own over time if you just have a little bit of imagination and utilize whatever resources you have available. All right, until my next video, hopefully I can set this up to do a little bit of combat. If not, I apologize. Sooner or later, I might be able to do that for you guys. But until, like I said, next video, happy gaming.